Good morning, campers, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. This is going to be episode 10 of our series, though only this first bit is actually taking place in our career save. I'll explain the rest later, but for now we are designing our mission to Eve that is going to complete this contract you see open in the bottom right corner. And it's going to require 2 landers and an orbiter. So I think the plan is going to be that we're going to use the nuclear tugboat that we already have in orbit, and we're going to send that out to Eve with the crew on board. So we're just designing right now a set of experiment pods that we'll effectively be mounting onto the nose of that in order to get out there. So first things first, this is going to be the atmospheric lander. This is going to touch down on the solid surface of Eve, get our core sample and our temperature sample or temperature record. We're also going to put a barometer on there just for completion's sake. But other than that, we are not adding any scientific experiments that we are not needing for this mission. When we do our manned mission to Eve eventually, if I actually manage to design a mission that can get back from Eve, we will put every scientific instrument we can on there, but for just the probe missions for contracts, I'm only going to try and do the stuff that the contract actually wants us to do. Put some RCS thrusters on the bottom to enable it to get away from the rest of the spacecraft when I undock it. And of course we need some power generation ability. Yes, there we go. Solar panels ought to do the trick here. We're going to move the antenna up so they don't look quite so weird with the solar panels there, but again, we don't need this to last very long. We only need it to survive down to the surface and manage to transmit some stuff back. So no heavy-duty batteries in this one. Though we are going to stick a battery on there just in case. Now that we have the the trajectories mod, we're going to be able to pick our landing site pretty effectively, which is going to be very, very nice for this mission. So that's going to do it for the first probe. We're going to set a decoupler there and start work on the second probe. Now, when I designed these, I used to build a central core and just attach probes to the outside of that, and then I realized that was throwing my rockets off quite a lot, making them unbalanced. So much better to design a symmetric probe and mount them all one after another on the front or back of the spacecraft. So this one's going to be landing on the water, so we've got parachutes, power generation. We want it to come down nice and slowly, so this one's getting 2 parachutes where the one above got only 1. Again, RCS thrusters on the bottom to give it some control once it's separate from the craft. And we're going to add these girders to this one to help it float a little bit better, and hopefully keep anything from breaking. That's the idea anyway. I think we're going to test this out at some point before we head for Eve, but not today. Today I got sidetracked doing other things, which we will see shortly. So setting this up so it doesn't get snagged on that other girder as it separates, and that ought to do the trick. So now we just need to mount the scientific experiments on board. We've got, antenna first. Then we're going to have a pressure barometer. And I believe I added a thermometer as well. And of course the laser experiment, which we will test fire in the VAB because that is safe. Yes, there we go. And thermometer. Alright, that's all the experiments that the ocean lander needs. Setting all of the decouplers and parachutes into the same action group. I'm going to be using right-click stuff to activate those, so I just want to make sure they don't go off with the rest of the rocket as we're going up. Thinking about adding the mystery goo, which I need to do in orbit, to just the experiment mount, but I think in the end I'm going to just add it to I'm just going to have it on the fuel tank that goes with, or there's going to be fuel and a science lab that attach to the crewed part of the vessel that's going to stay in orbit. And we're going to put the mystery goo on there so they can do that at a couple of different biomes. Checking on everything to make sure it's all set. And we've added a payload shroud. Looks good. Looks very good. Kind of optimistic at this point, thinking I'm going to launch this on a 1.25 meter rocket, but no, I think we're going to scale this up to 2 meters and launch it on one of those eventually. We are not going to launch it this episode. We're going to wait until that's a little bit closer because we do at some point want to test that ocean lander. There we go. So that's going to be what we mount onto a rocket eventually. So when I was putting this together, I realized that I was going to need to test it at some point. We are going to roll it out to the launch pad here in a bit just to make sure everything works properly. This is the orbiter that's going to put it into is going to get it to our science spacecraft. And I've added parachutes and RCS controls so this thing can deorbit itself later and potentially be recovered and give us some money back. Or worst case scenario, we can upgrade this and send this to Eve instead of our other vehicle. So, we're not going to launch this just yet, so this is not a final form for the Eve Biostudy module. Pretty close to what I expect the final form will be. So let's go ahead and roll this out to the launch pad after we finalize the landing legs here. Yeah, let's roll this out to the launch pad, test everything that we can at the launch pad, make sure it all works. I realized I also hadn't done a couple of these experiments at the launch pad. Laser beam ignites some pools of rocket fuel. That sounds slightly dangerous. We are able to take a core sample by drilling into another part of the spacecraft. Naturally yields very little science, but I wouldn't expect that to give us too much there. And everything seemed to be in working order, nothing fell over, so we are going to head back into the vehicle assembly building after we check the weight on the spacecraft, and it comes in just under 17 tons. Now that's very important. That is the mass of our spacecraft. That's 17,000 kilograms. We are going to spend the entire rest of the episode developing launch vehicles for various payloads, because when I was recording this, I was watching the NASA social events on Wednesday. So they were mostly talking about the Orion program, the different launch vehicles that are associated with that. It's launching on a Delta IV Heavy. It was supposed to be today, but it's going to wind up launching tomorrow. They had to postpone that due to some sort of fill drain valve that wasn't opening and closing properly in one of the common booster cores. One of those is a education program, one of those is a rocket. So this rocket here is our way of testing whether or not we can put that Eve into orbit, that Eve Biostudy. This is in our Sandbox save on the same install of Kerbal Space Program. And we're just trying to, the first idea was to see what I could launch with a single core version of our Delta IV inspired rocket. So this is the same rocket that you've seen in previous videos, but without the 2 strap-on boosters on either side. Fast forwarding a little bit through the boring parts. Got our gravity turn. And the only thing in the payload shroud is a lot of fuel. So we're going to see how much fuel is left. That's going to give us a rough idea of what kind of mass we can put into orbit with this rocket. Jettisoning the payload fairings and firing the second stage, which is powered by a Poodle engine rather than a Skipper. I wanted ultimate efficiency up here. And I'm expecting I can replace that part with the, rather than, that'll count for the orbiter that I've already put onto the Eve Biostudy module. And that'll save us another stage. I won't be trying to launch that stage into orbit as well. So we're going to pull into orbit here. And then we're going to check and see how much fuel we have left. That'll give us a rough idea of what kind of mass this single core booster is capable of putting into orbit. there we are. Okay, so you can see the fuel tank is still more than half full, so that suggests that our this rocket is rated for about 9 tons of cargo it can put into Low-Kerbin-Orbit. That's LKO for short. So you generally want to see how much fuel is left, and that mass of that fuel, the equivalent mass of a fuel tank with the same amount of fuel in it, is what you would have been able to put into orbit. You can also just stick a full fuel tank on the front and tell the rocket not to take fuel out of that by right-clicking, and there's a little play and a little play button on there. You can hit no. You can click the play button and change it to a no symbol, and then the rocket will not draw fuel out of that. So that tells us this can put about 9 tons into orbit, which is pretty impressive actually. All things considered, and that is enough to get our EVE biostudy module off the ground and into Low-Kerbin-Orbit. So we're probably going to be using this rocket in the next episode to launch the EVE biostudy module. In the meantime, we are going to save this as a subassembly, which we're going to move over into our career mode save, so we can pick that up and use it there. We're going to just call this the Flingomax launcher, because we called the other one the Flingomax Heavy, and you know, might as well stick with our naming conventions there. 9 tons into Low-Kerbin-Orbit. And we're also going to test a few other designs just because I wanted to see what else I could do. I realized I was... see, what NASA winds up doing is they design payloads for rockets they already have. They know how much they can lift with this rocket, and they design the payload around that. Whereas I kept building new launchers for every single rocket I was launching, which was probably inefficient. It was probably costing me money. So now that I know how much these launch stages each cost and how much weight they can each put up into orbit, we'll be able to tailor our payloads to fit into these. So this is, I wanted to see how much I could put up with a smaller rocket. This is just 2 FLT 800 fuel tanks and a LVT 45 engine. Booster separation. The upper stage is powered by an LVT 909. The kind of lander engine there. Very efficient. Getting that into orbit here. And again, this is going to tell us roughly how much mass we're able to put into orbit with this rocket. We do have a full fuel tank on the front of this that we haven't tapped into yet. And performing our orbital insertion maneuvers. So that was about 1.25 tons into Low-Kerbin-Orbit, which is definitely not bad for such a tiny rocket. That would certainly be more than enough to, I believe our first crewed Kerbal mission was in a very similar rocket to this. And I believe 1.25 tons is enough for, now that we have the ion drives unlocked, that's more than enough to get quite a lot of those into Low-Kerbin-Orbit. And then from there they can go pretty much wherever they want with the ion drive. So we're going to go back into the vehicle assembly building, save this one as a subassembly as well, which will also get moved over into our career save, because it's nice and cheap. Look at that, it's only like, what, 8,000 some? For that entire launch assembly. And we wind up calling this the Kawoosh because I had Stargate in my head, the Kawoosh being the blue vortex that comes out of the Stargate when they turn it on. But capable of 1.25 tons into Low-Kerbin-Orbit, and we're going to quadruple that before we head on to our next build. So I figured since we had a Flingomax rocket, we had our Kawoosh rocket, and we had a Flingomax Heavy rocket, I wanted something that was kind of between the Kawoosh and the Flingomax. So we're going to do a heavy version of the Kawoosh, though we're not going to do it quite the same as we did for the Flingomax. Looking for some dead weight items I can stick on the front to bring this to an even 4 tons. We're only trying to go for an even 4 tons here. We don't intend to actually put the full FLT 800 fuel tank on there. Alright, so there's our payload for this mission. That's all going to be dead weight that we try and put into orbit. And so our inspiration for this is that we're going to try and use roughly 4 of our Kawoosh rocket bodies and stick them together in such a way that they're able to get a 4 times as much, almost 4 times as much cargo into orbit. It's going to use 4 engines anyway. So we're going to detach the fins, change this first stage into a triple core booster with 3 engines. That's going to do most of the work, and then we're going to have a second stage on here that is 1 FLT 800 fuel tank and 1 engine, and or 2 fuel tanks. Okay, no, there you are. Like, I thought I took a fuel tank off of that one. Yes. Alright, and we're also going to make that one an LVT-45 instead of an LVT-30. We're going to make those LVT-30s since we have the fins for attitude control in the lower atmosphere. Alright, so that should be the rocket that gets this into orbit. So this is now a 3-stage rocket. We've got the tri-core booster. We've got the second stage, which is a single core, similar design but about half the fuel. And then we've got the upper stage, which is the LVT-909 powered, same upper stage as the previous rocket. And I forgot to strap the boosters together, so we're just going to make a quick fix here before we do that again. That was all kinds of things going wrong. Here's the actual test flight. Good ignition, got plenty of power behind this rocket. And all the wobbles have gone away, so we're making pretty good progress. This design, very similar to what got us to Minmus in our career mode save. So I'm trying to stick close to the rocket designs we've already used and just kind of standardize them, know how much cargo they can each carry so I can use them as necessary in future missions. Another modification we can make to this one to squeeze a whole bunch of extra Delta V out of it is we can, for one thing, on each of these rockets we can add solid rocket boosters to give us a little extra kick off the launch pad and increase the payload slightly. But another thing we can also do is on this rocket in particular, we can replace this second stage with a nuclear-powered second stage. And between that and adding some solid rocket boosters, that would give us a pretty significant capability to go elsewhere in the local system. We launched our HOC mission off of a similar rocket that was a large bottom or large lower core with a nuclear upper stage. Right, pulling this into Low-Kerbin-Orbit here, using up the last of our second stage booster, and then we're going to drop that, fire the upper stage. That's going to do most of the work of putting us into orbit. Again, this has to do quite a lot since it has 4 tons of dead weight on the front. But this makes it into orbit with almost half of that upper stage fuel still remaining. So that tells us that we can definitely put 4 tons into orbit. In fact, we can do slightly over 4 tons. And keep in mind, we also have not just the weight of the fuel available as cargo weight, we have the weight of the probe core as well, though that's pretty much insignificant compared to the weight of the fuel tanks. It's only another 1/5 of a ton or so. On the small, actually on the small rockets it might be 1/10 of a ton, I'm not sure. But just checking how much fuel is left, making sure everything worked fine. We didn't drain these fuel tanks by accident, I don't believe. Yep. So we're going to save this as a subassembly once again. Everything below the drone core, so that's going to be just a ready-to-go launch stage. We're going to call that the Trikawoosh 4, since it's 4 engines but a 3-core rocket. So I think that seems a decent name to me anyway. So it's about just over 4 tons in Low-Kerbin-Orbit that we'll be using that for. And then we've got one more design that we're going to do in this, and that's going to be a new version of our Delta IV Heavy inspired launch stage, the Flingomax Heavy, I believe we're calling it. We're going to redo that with a nose cone in this one. Though we do save a version without the nose cone, because I don't think we've unlocked it yet in our career save. And we're just going to make sure that we know how much it can put into orbit. I want to test that before we use it anymore in our career save. That way I can, kind of design the payloads to fit that a little bit better. We're aiming, of course, since we're using 3 times the propulsion in the lower atmosphere, we're aiming for 3 times the payload. Which we should technically be able to get more than that, but I'm only aiming for 3 times the payload. 3 times the payload I'll be happy with. Then anything more we can just kind of bump this up from there. I mean, of course, we could always add 2 more boosters onto this and make it the Flingomax Heavy, or the Flingomax Ultra Heavy, something like that. I also want to make, I'm trying to make a version of this where the separation of the booster stages goes off without a hitch, so I don't have to cut the throttle during the launch, even if I'm not perfectly rolled so that the boosters fall away due to gravity. I want to be able to just hit the stage button and keep going without slowing down, because that costs a little bit of delta V every time you cut that engine on ascent in that part of the atmosphere. So we're going to be aiming for 3 times the weight that the single booster is capable of. So that's going to be, I believe, 27 tons in this particularly suggestive-looking payload fairing. And going to launch. And I'm going to tell you right now, this one doesn't go quite so well. You might have noticed I made a small mistake while working on that. Yeah, we had a... that looks cool, but we had some symmetry errors with the separation motor, so we're going to fix that before we go back to the test flight. So what we're doing for our career mode save is we're considering these simulations, effectively. They're not costing us any money because we're running them without actually launching the rockets, but we're also doing these on... we're not doing these with Kerbals on board. And of course, once I actually bring them into the career save, anything could go wrong. Things I'm sure will go wrong. But of course we just want to test these, make sure they work before we spend money on them in the career mode save. Because money is becoming hard to come by. Alright, separation of those. There we are. That worked out surprisingly well, though we haven't introduced a crazy little wobble here. So we're going to secure our payload a little bit better and try this again. We're going to move the fairing up to just beneath the drone core this time. And we're going to strap that on with some struts here to the nose cones. That should help with some of the wobbling. The payload fairings, being mod parts, don't have the structural integrity that the stock parts all do anymore. That's just the thing I've noticed. Ever since they buffed up the connections between stock parts, mod parts have not quite caught up there. I don't know what they did, but they only applied it to the stock parts. Alright, this launch actually going as planned. So we're going to show the entire thing, albeit fast-forwarded. Alright, coming up on booster separation here. We are tilting over. Notice we did not roll. That is part of the test for this. I want to see if we can do this ascent without rolling and without losing the central booster. Didn't even throttle down, and we ditched the boosters. No harm done. That's going to be very, very useful in future missions. Might save us a little bit of delta V there. Tilted over a bit too hard there, but this still has enough delta V to get us into orbit. That mainsail packing plenty of punch, even with 27 tons on the nose. Still a bit low in the atmosphere, so we are not tilting over all the way to our velocity vector. And there we go. We got the apoapsis out of the atmosphere, aiming for 75,000 by 75,000. Burning the rest of the fuel in our booster, dropping that to expose our orbital insertion stage. Again, this is just a poodle and one of the large fuel tanks. And again, this is the closest analog I have in-game to the Delta IV Heavy that will be launching the Orion spacecraft tomorrow morning. on a 2-orbit test flight. Very, very much looking forward to that. I was up all morning watching that coverage when they scrubbed the launch this morning. Going to be very, very cool when it goes off tomorrow. It's doing one low Earth orbit, and then it's boosting its orbit using an upper stage similar to this to a pretty elliptical orbit where it's going to simulate, I think, 85% of lunar re-entry velocity. And it's going to splash down in the Pacific shortly after that, where I believe it's the Anchorage is standing by to pick it up. Also kind of neat, NASA is going to try and televise the capsule splashdown. They've got a modified Predator drone that they're flying around out there from Edwards Air Force Base. Alright, so as we saw, we got into orbit no problem. This thing capable of about 30 tons into Low-Kerbin-Orbit. Though we go with 27 since that's what we started with. And that's going to do it for this episode. Once we have this saved as a subassembly, we're going to move all these over into our career mode save and continue our adventures next time. Thank you so much for watching.